Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Engineers, as you know. We're back live with Neil Johnson, and Neil Johnson's VP of Engineering at a company called Element. And he's going to be talking to us today about Matrix, the open source messaging platform, and also a little bit more about decentralized architecture and a couple of things on security and encryption. He's super pumped for this, so am I. So stay tuned for the next 45 minutes or so, and we're going to explore this a little bit more. So, Neil, do you want to give us some insight for the audience into yourself, Element, maybe what that VP of engineering role looks like, and we can start touching on that relationship with Matrix?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro. Pleasure to be here. So I work at Element, and Element is a company that is sort of intrinsically tied with something called the Matrix Protocol, which is a secure, decentralized, open standard for real-time communication.
Okay.
My job at Element is, and I guess it's a pretty standard engineering management role. I joined the company about 3 years ago. There was 10 of us at that point, mainly in engineering. And my job was to really figure out how we grow that engineering team. We're up to about 40 engineers now. And just go through all the growing pains that startups always have. Like how do you make sure that you're working on the right stuff? How do you keep everyone aligned? How do you make sure that the right channels of communication are there? How do you figure out who to bring into the business? You make decisions differently when there's 40 of you versus when there's 10 of you.
Yeah.
You know, all that kind of standard stuff, really.
Okay.
So that's the role where I spend most of my time.
Okay. And what vision did you buy into a couple of years back? You know, how was that projected onto you as to this is what we want to go and do, being open source and decentralized?
Yeah, I mean, I knew the project for a long time, and because it's an open source project, I already had a very good idea of what they were trying to do. I was running that software myself and sort of playing with it. I
Okay.
knew many of the core team and had worked with a few of them in the past as well. I was very familiar with the project, and they were Element as a company it was at a time where I thought my skills could actually be quite useful to them.
Yeah.
Up until that point, I'd been more a kind of cheerleader from the side. It was a pretty easy sell, on that front. And then the reason that I was actually interested in this project is it's extremely ambitious, and we were talking about an open standard for communication here. So
Yeah.
most people on their phones right now, maybe they have 5-6 different messaging apps, and they talk to some friends on WhatsApp and some friends or maybe their colleagues on Slack, maybe they use Telegram or Signal or SMS, maybe for family members. I mean, who knows? Like you're going to have a lot of things, and the reason that these messengers don't really interoperate is there's no open standard for them to do so, and also there's an incentives issue as well. Like if you're WhatsApp, you want to have your closed walled garden. I mean, it's kind of important for what they're doing. And you might say, okay, well, fine, I've got 5 messaging apps on my phone. That's annoying, but it's hardly the end of the world, isn't it? It's a bit of a first world problem, isn't it? But when you think about it a little more deeply, if WhatsApp were to do something that I didn't like,
Mm-hmm.
if they were to say, well, we're end-to-end encrypted, but we're sort of not going to do that anymore, or we'd like to start advertising to you based on your metadata, or whatever it would be, and I said, okay, I don't like that, I want to leave. I can't do that without leaving behind my social graph.
Okay.
I cannot talk to my WhatsApp friends without using WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And this is a problem then, because as a user, you're stuck. You don't have choice in the way that you probably should. If you compare that with something like email, where okay, it's annoying to leave your email provider, but you can still send emails to whoever you want in the world just from your new email address. That's much closer to how I think the world ought to be and how technology ought to be. So that part was incredibly important to me. I think doing it in a way that is, firstly, as an open standard, Doing it in a way that is decentralized is very interesting, and maybe we can touch on that a little bit later.
Yeah.
And doing it in a way that's end-to-end encrypted. It's part of the UN's sort of Bill of Human Rights that people have the right to privacy, and end-to-end encryption is part of that. And trying to do that so it works cross-client is a hard problem to do, particularly in a decentralized setup. So they had some really big engineering challenges, and it was a very exciting project. And so all that combined, joined the gang properly sort of about 3 years ago.
Okay. So who are you guys working with at the moment?
So the thing that really surprised us in the early days of Matrix, we didn't anticipate that a very, very good use case for what we do are governmental or large civic institutions. And the reasons for this are sort of, there's a number of different things, but one of the things is if you are a very, very large organization and you have a lot of structure within yourself, then maybe you want your various different subparts of your organization, maybe they want to run their own systems. They need to talk to each other somehow, but they have their own security people, their own IT people, and so the ministry of this and the ministry of that need to talk to each other, but they want to be a little bit separate as well. So that part works really well. The fact that you can run this yourself or within your own network is extremely important. So if you think today, it is very common for our most senior politicians and civil servants to talk to each other via WhatsApp. And they do this and it's end-to-end encrypted, so that's good. But that metadata, just knowing who is talking to who and when they're doing it, that in itself is really, really sensitive information. And that is leaving your network. It's going to another country and you had no idea what's happening at the other end of that. And that's actually quite serious when you think about it from those sorts of conversations. Sorry, excuse me. So being able to have ownership of your own data, having this federated setup, and also the encryption as well, because they're still talking about sensitive things, and they need that. So we're working a lot with governments right now. Those in the public eye are, France has a extremely good open government initiative, and we are sort of in production in every one of their ministries right now.
Wow. Okay.
It's been great to sort of work with them and figure out how to deploy all this technology within their infrastructure. And then more recently, working a lot in Germany, and one particularly interesting project is helping. German education works on a sort of regional basis, and just working with individual regions in Germany to provide remote learning tools, because particularly in Germany, data privacy and data sovereignty are very, very important. They don't want to use something like Teams. And so our technology is a really, really good match for that. So we're working very hard right now to make sure that schools in Germany have good remote learning technology. So we've got that kind of stuff. And then at the other end, our sort of roots and where we came from were things like IRC, and a lot of the open source world sort of formed around that sort of technology. And so a lot of those sorts of communities casting around for a slightly more sort of modern take on the same sort of problem. And so we last year, Mozilla chose Matrix and Element as the technology for backing all of their open source communities.
Wow, that's big.
Which is really great. And we've they were using IRC before, the Mosnet network. And so, based on who we are, it's not just, oh, that's a big name. Like, we really don't want to mess that one up, and we take enormous pride in being able to provide that sort of technology for a force that we just think is extraordinarily good. So it's a real mix of the sort of people that we work with. And actually, sorry, one final use case that I think is quite interesting is because our network is very resilient, because it's decentralized, there's no central point of control.
Yeah.
We're actually used in disaster recovery
Okay.
situations.
Nice.
So, you have a bunch of communication nodes, and maybe there's extreme weather conditions going on, such that one of those nodes might just lose power at any moment.
Yeah.
And you've got to be resilient to that. When that happens, the technology has to be as fine as it possibly can be. And when that person comes back online, then they integrate seamlessly. And so that's also a really great use of this technology.
Wow, that's pretty diverse. That's
Yeah,
pretty
isn't it?
diverse. Okay. Um, where's the vision now? Where do you go from Mozilla to French and German governments? What could be the plan? Let's not say let's take on WhatsApp. It's a very different take to that. But what's the plan? Is it just continuing to consolidate where you are already, or is it grow, diversify into different areas?
So the idea behind something like Matrix is to really be the kind of part of the fabric of the internet, which sounds like a very grandiose thing to say, but
Yeah.
we feel like there's not a good way to do real-time information sharing that is standard.
Okay.
And so instant messaging is a really great use case for this. And what we would like to be is a way that any protocol can interoperate,
Yeah.
and sort of it is possible using our technology today to have one person on WhatsApp and someone on, I don't know, Discord, and they can have a conversation. You can make that work, and you can make that happen.
Yeah.
But what we really want to do is we look at something like email. We look at the impact that's had on the world over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And it's got its detractors too, but it's clearly been
It's a mainstay,
right.
right?
And we sort of want to have the same kind of impact in the next 50 years. So that's the level of sort of ambition that we have, and what we're really trying to do with this. We think that having an open standard for communication is kind of essential. And in the short term, we're just going to build out things that we think give people value right now. We want to grow that ecosystem. We'd like it to be much like with email. We want as many people on the public network as possible.
Yeah.
Such that that when you want to reach someone and find someone, then you just have a natural assumption that they're on Matrix, and you can reach them somehow.
Okay. You touched on quite an interesting point. I'm keen to explore the interoperability a little bit more. That seems quite tough, depending on different systems, different technology. And offline, we've spoken a little bit about end-to-end encryption and how that's really tough.
Right.
How do you make that happen? How do you make that happen? That's a broad question. I get that.
Yeah. I mean, it is a challenge, because what you're trying to do is ram together two protocols that were not designed to work together, and you end up with basically the lowest common denominator between those two things.
Okay.
So it's never the perfect experience, but often you can really get a long way down that
Okay.
path. We've got a very mature Slack bridge. We of course have a good IRC bridge. That was our sort of first bridge. And you just take a look at the protocol, and you figure out a way to get the best experience on both sides. And we've got to the point now where we think sometimes people don't realize they're talking to people on other protocols. I mean, that's really when you know you've done
That's
it.
seamless.
Done it right. End-to-end encryption, obviously, really, really difficult,
Okay.
because right now there isn't an open standard for that.
Yeah.
For end-to-end encryption, and there is a really great project called MLS that we're sort of contributing to,
Yeah.
To achieve that. I think that's a really powerful thing, but it's not here yet.
Yeah.
So that's a really hard part for bridging.
This might seem dim. Sorry to interrupt there, but how do you pass an open standard, or how do you create an open standard?
I mean, initially, you sort of write your protocol, write some reference implementations, and say, "Here you go, world. What do you
Okay.
think?"
Yeah.
And the world can either say, "This is interesting. I'll try and use this," or it can say, "Thanks. I'm moving on now."
Yeah.
Where we're at on that, and then much further down the line, there are all sorts of standards bodies that can help you
Okay.
solidify all of this.
Yeah.
Where we're at right now is we have a foundation, the matrix.org Foundation, that it has element people as part of its directorship, or guardians as we call them, but it's not a majority element. So, and the purpose of that group is to basically just guide this standard and make sure that it's staying true to its mission and its goals. Further down the line, we might look for slightly more formal standardization, and IETF is an example of standards body that we could talk to. But right now, that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah. And handling people's data at the moment, and you're talking about metadata that gets passed across channels and who people are talking to.
Mhm.
How do you protect everyone that's talking on Matrix?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Okay.
And obviously for the nature of our business, an extremely important one. And fortunately, people way more knowledgeable on the subject than me have spent a lot of time helping us figure out, well, how do we do this just anyway as an organization that really cares about this topic? But then how do you think about federation in a GDPR world?
Yeah.
Because you are sharing data between two entities, and you might not have a commercial relationship between those two entities. So it's actually quite an interesting part of GDPR
Okay.
law, I guess. So on the data side, like we provide all the tools that you would need as an administrator on your server to make sure that you can be compliant, and that people who want to exercise their right to erasure can do so. And I think we're actually going to make a few changes to the protocol over time as well to make that a little bit easier too.
Yeah.
But a lot of this is sort of uncharted territory as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the sort of closest analog is email. And so we take a lot of inspiration from how the same situation applies there. Yeah, we're still working through on it. We think we're in a good spot,
Okay.
but we're regularly talking with so in the UK, the ICO, and just trying to make sure that we think we're doing the right things. We think we're in the spirit, and just make sure that we actually are. We have a very privacy focused community,
Yeah.
and if we were to let up in this area, they would let us know extremely quickly.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the joys of being open source and building a community around that, because you'll know when you're doing well and you'll know when you're doing bad, right? And it's
Yeah,
about being honest and taking some introspection and thinking, okay, are we actually doing the right things for people? And continually looking back at that and thinking, does this work? Does this work? Does this work?
oh yeah. I mean, when your primary professional output is in the open, and anyone on the internet can comment on what you're doing,
Yeah.
I mean that is it's electric. Like it forces you bring your A game at all times.
Yeah, it's
You're
awesome.
going to get that feedback, but it's also very gratifying, because it's the best way to improve. It's the best way to know that you're doing the right things, and we get just fantastic feedback from our community. I mean, Matrix would be nothing without the community,
Yeah.
and so to work out in the open is the best way to do it.
And what do people actually contribute? Can we understand that a little bit more? Like, how impactful are some of those contributions, and why is the community so important?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. People, maybe someone is using Element on their phone or on the web, and they would like an extra knob to twiddle, or they spot a bug and it annoys them, and they're So, I mean, they're skilled in a way that they can actually fix this, and they
Yep.
can send us a PR, and we can say great, and we can merge it, and it's there, and they fixed the thing.
Yep.
I mean, all of our projects would sort of have that culture, and you try and help people through that. Sometimes people want to stick around a bit more seriously, and long-term members of the community and want to take on slightly more sort of challenging parts of the code base, and that's obviously phenomenal. But also contributing to the spec itself and the standard itself.
Nice.
That really, really does need all sorts of different perspectives.
Yep.
On all the different use cases. That it's very hard, as we were saying at the beginning, to really anticipate all the use cases for this kind of stuff. So having a broad range of voices on what might be important is really, really valuable. So people get involved from all sorts of different directions, and sometimes it's simply that they just they really enjoy this tool and they just want to make it a bit better somehow. Sometimes they're coming at it more from what would I want? I really love this idea of an open standard for communication, but what would I really want to see from it? Oh, I can get involved here. So yeah, it's a really big range.
Nice.
I mean, from our point of view, we work hard to try and make sure that the community is welcoming and it's inclusive, and people can get involved. And it's so I think sometimes it can be very intimidating to start off in an open source project. So we've been trying very hard, I think, particularly over the last couple of years, to make it a little bit easier. I think there's more we could do, and we will do.
Yeah.
And then also there's a sort of, over the summer we have schemes like Google Summer of Code, where folks contribute directly via that scheme, or something like Outreachy, which is a really great initiative to help people who might not normally see themselves as open source developers get involved with our sort of projects.
Okay. And in terms of Matrix itself, can you talk to us a little bit about how the platform's actually made up in terms of technologies or architecturally, and just help us understand that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the nice things is, because it's a standard, there are multiple implementations of the same blocks of technology.
Yeah.
So if we start on the server, we have a system called Synapse, which is Python based, and the story of Synapse is basically the story of almost any new project or any startup project where we built out this thing just to prove, does this protocol kind of work? We put it out into the wild to see if anyone would like to use it. Turned out they really did. Oh, gee, we're in production with our prototype. Let's do something about that. And then so very, very gradually over time, we've been trying to work on that technology, make it more scalable, make it more reliable, all the things that you would want to do.
Yeah.
But this is core messaging infrastructure. And if you were to start from scratch on a project like that, you might choose a language that was more commonly associated with systems programming. And so there is a second generation server called Dendrite, which we've written in Go.
Okay.
Which really, I mean, its initial sort of design goals were to operate at a very large scale. So you have a bajillion users being supported by this wonderful sort of horizontally scalable setup, and that sort of legacy is there within its code base. We've actually used that same technology though to power our P2P initiative. So we actually run this thing on sort of hundreds of machines in a data center somewhere, or you could, and at the same time you run that same code just on a phone, which is kind of extraordinary. But then there are other implementations. I mean, probably my favorite in the community right now is a Rust implementation.
Nice.
And they're really focusing on performance and just making everything feel really, really snappy and just sort of showing what's possible. And so it's really great to see that coming to the fore as well.
Yeah, well, I've seen that a couple of times on the podcast, and most of the platforms that we talk about are about building something real time. They're using Rust at the moment. We've had that in a couple of instances: Hadean, TrueLayer, yourselves, or there's elements of that. Excuse the pun.
Right.
But that's what we're seeing, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and by the way, I should say the Rust implementation is actually completely community derived. So there are no Element people directly working on it at all. We like to try and support them, but I want to give credit where credit's due.
A whole load of Rustaceans.
Right, and they're doing a super job. So we want to give them a shout out and support them. The project's called Conduit, but it's nothing to do with the Element team directly.
That's
so it's really
awesome.
exciting to see that.
That's really awesome. You're particularly keen to talk about some of the team, and you're massively complimentary around the open source community, but yourselves at Element have obviously built a cracking team that helps build Matrix, etc. So I'm keen to understand a little bit more about your team building that from 2018. So do you want to give the audience a little bit more insight into 2018 onwards, building a remote team in times like this? How efficient can you be?
Yeah. I mean, what was kind of interesting at that point in 2018, we were the team had been working together for quite some time. Matrix originally came out of it was more a sort of R&D project as part of a much larger organization, and we spun that out to be independent. And so the team had worked with each other, co-located with one another by and large, and that was our sort of nucleus.
Yeah.
What we found, particularly back then, was that some people really understand the mission and get very, very excited about what I've sort of been talking about today. And they're like, oh my God, that's exactly what I wish existed. I have to come work on this. And that's brilliant, right? I mean, who wouldn't want that? The reality, though, of that is those people wouldn't necessarily be based anywhere near where we were based, which was in London, and they're based all over the world. Relatedly, often the route through were people who joined our open source community were contributing and doing a super job, and we thought, well, actually, why don't you just do this all the time, and we can you can join the team as well. So we found it very, very valuable to be flexible on where people would work from.
Okay.
And that brought with it its own challenges, all the classic stuff that anyone trying to manage remote, and I think everyone in the world right now is sort of learning about how you have to be much, much more explicit with your communication. Everything has to be really, really conscious, and you have to get a lot better at writing stuff down. And making sure if you're going to have a meeting, let's make sure it's got minutes to it. So if someone can't go, then they can just read what happens, or maybe they don't have to go now because it's all there. I mean, we had a few things that made it a lot easier for us, which are around, because if you're hiring someone that you've already worked with via the medium of an open source project, you already know you can work with them asynchronously, and you know that you've de-risked all the normal sort of things that you might have to do through an interview process, because you sort of know them by that point. Also, our product is a communication tool. So if we can't make this work remotely as a business, then what chance does everybody else have? So we didn't just sort of dive right into this and go, okay, we're sort of remote first company, but we sort of gradually built up our expertise and our knowledge of how to do this. What I think it's really meant has been, when we're hiring, it's not just, is this person a prolific engineer in terms of the functionality they're going to put out. It's also, can this person communicate well in written form? That's kind of really important for us. Are we actually going? Is this actually going to work remote? Because that's a slightly different set of skills. So we've built out the team that way. We hire partly from our community. We also like to try and consciously hire from outside our community. Just to bring in a whole bunch of extra ideas to the mix. A lot of the team, though, do have some sort of open source background somewhere. Again, I think it's because it's very mission orientated as a company. it tends to attract that kind of profile.
Okay.
And that's it, really. That's sort of how we approached it.
Picking up on that, that's seriously interesting, because I don't think anyone that I've spoken to has had any level of forward thinking about thinking if someone is remote ready for their team. Everyone thinks that, or that I've spoken to thinks that, yeah, everyone can just slot right in. You can just go into remote as long as you've got everything set up. But it comes from this mindset of being online first, as in yourselves, which I quite like. Being able to communicate effectively over a written format, verbally. That's something that, as we speak about it, I find really, really interesting. And I'm hoping anyone that listens can try and adopt that, because yes, our world has changed, and I think a lot of people are speaking from some of the same hymn sheets when they say there is a commuter belt into London. We don't necessarily need to compete with that anymore. Let's look at different talent pools. That's smart, but everyone's got the same idea. People don't have the solutions yet. That'll come, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, actually, a company that is really interesting on this are Automatic, who basically back WordPress.
Okay.
And there's a lot of parallels actually between their business and ours. And in fact, I should probably say they're an investor in Element. But as I understand their interview process, almost all of it is done asynchronously. So I don't even know if I've heard it described that they wouldn't even have a video call necessarily as part of that interview process. Everything is written, which I'm just sort of scratching the surface of. But I haven't heard anybody doing that before. And I think the rationale is exactly this, right? You're going to be communicating asynchronously and in written form. So that needs to form part of the interview process. And that's how they will assess that part of their skill set.
Wow, that's quite interesting. If there are engineers listening to this podcast, and I've said it a couple of times, we've hit 1,000 subscribers, which is great. It's great for us. 90% of those are software engineers, so this will resonate with a lot of people listening. And we're in distributed locations now from looking at some of our data. Sorry, back to my point. Talk to us a little bit about some of the more challenges, if you like, or engineering challenges that you face with Matrix, and how that might fit an engineer potentially listening to this, thinking about applying.
Do you mean technical challenges or more the sort of social challenges of
Sorry,
working
excuse me,
remote?
I should have been a little bit more clear. Technical challenges. Going back to some of those
Oh, right.
technical challenges, what do you face? Can we deep dive
Sure.
that a little bit more?
Yeah. Love this. So one of the things, what's interesting for us is the original core team. Originally, before Matrix existed, they were working within this large telecoms company, and we were building out proprietary communication apps for telecoms companies. So it was like a sort of, you sign up to whatever telco, and you've got SMS, but you've also got your own sort of messenger, and they wanted that, and it was a
MMS,
closed
SMS.
Yeah, but this would have been kind of like, my telco messenger that might have included SMS within it, but it also would be doing sort of just pure messaging, like IP messaging on that same network.
Yeah.
And we were building out this, and we got very, very good at it, and we're building it and doing it and building it and doing it. And after 5 or 6 of these big projects, so the whole team were just like, hang on, this is a real shame, because these people can't actually talk to each other. It's all closed. Wouldn't it be better if they all implemented the same standard, and then they could all talk to each other? And we said, yeah, that would be a good idea, wouldn't it? And that was the sort of the core of where Matrix came from. But what it means is we've got a very good idea of how hard and how long it takes to build a really highly scalable messaging service in a centralized way, in a closed platform, and we know how long that takes. If you try and so then you take that exact team who are already well practiced at doing this playbook, and you say to them, right, we're going to do it differently this time. We're going to do this in a decentralized way, so you cannot rely on any central point of coordination or orchestration.
Okay.
We're going to do it out in the open as an open standard. So any change you want to make to an API, you're going to have to take it through a process. You can't just sort of change it on a whim. You're going to consult on everything that you do. So do everything that you know, but do it in a decentralized way as part of an open standard. How much harder could that really be?
Yeah.
Now, empirically, we have found that it probably takes about 6 times as long to do the things that you would do. Just based on what we've found.
Yeah.
Now, the benefits of that, we hope, are enormous, because suddenly you have this open standard, and this means that everything should be that much more durable. Yeah. So, for instance, I don't know, for me, I have a whole bunch of messages in MySpace, and I am never getting those back.
Yeah.
But I also sent emails back during that same kind of era, and I can still read those emails, no problem.
Yeah.
We have built an open standard, so the same should be possible. If Element falls by the wayside, then hopefully there'll be some other client in the future that's even better, and they can still read that. So there's a huge benefit to doing it in this open as a standardized way, but it costs more and you have to invest more. Similarly, if you are trying to build out end-to-end encryption and you want it to run on your web browser as it does on your phone, as it does on your other phone, and so with WhatsApp, everything's kind of tied to your phone. You can do WhatsApp for web, but it's basically going through your phone. If you want to do this multi-client in a decentralized architecture where you cannot guarantee that the other person's server will even be available. So all the sort of key negotiation is not possible because they're not even there. But you need a robust encryption scheme. How are you going to do that? That's a hard problem to solve. So on the back end, there's some really sort of gnarly questions there. The other part of it is decentralized. So if there was a conversation and you had your server, I had my server, someone else has got their server, and we're all talking in the same room together, that conversation exists equally across those three. Now, no one gets to choose truth independently, or rather, the protocol means that each of those servers have to eventually agree on the consensus of what has just happened. So I said something, then you said something, then someone else says something. Eventually, all three of those servers independently have to agree what just happened. And that's hard. If you were doing it in a centralized service, you just have a database, and each of the clients just go to the database and say, "Oh, right, well, these 3 messages were sent." In a decentralized world, you really don't have that. So we've got some very interesting challenges around consensus, some very interesting challenges around end-to-end encryption, and then on the other end of this, all of this sort of very interesting technical stuff going on in the background. Most users, they just want to send a message. And you've got to find the UX paradigms to help them understand what's going on, help them understand how the end-to-end encryption is working for them, not get in the way, but also make sure they know what's actually happening. And make this as smooth and as seamless as people are used to using regular consumer messaging apps. So all these things combined are very, very challenging, and force you to really evaluate a whole bunch of stuff from first principles. And it's backend engineering, it's client engineering, it's UX. All these things combined make for a very busy day, and really exciting challenges. Because if you pull it off, then we believe the advantages are worth it. Like, the investment is worth it, but the challenge of pulling it off is substantial for sure.
Okay. And style of engineer. Don't get me wrong. I've 1000% listened to what you've just said. in terms of style of engineer, or what backgrounds, if people are listening to this, might they come from? Do you think? You obviously make the connection to being mission orientated. People have come from open source backgrounds, great longevity. But any particular environments that you see work out quite well because they're quite transferable?
I think the most important thing for us is that mission angle.
Fine.
If people are really excited about that, we actually don't really care
Good.
too much else about them. They don't have to come from an open source background. Sometimes it helps because that is part of how we work, but that's definitely not a requirement. But what we really want to see is that people get the mission and they're really excited about that. It's a first-class citizen through our hiring process, and if people have that, then that gets them a long way through. And we find that that's just obviously very helpful because you arrive and you're just really energized and engaged with the problem space in front of you.
Nice.
I mean, the sorts of things that will help generally are, we're a startup and we're trying to do something that hasn't really been done before. So you're going to have to be adaptable. You're going to have to be resilient. You're going to have to be curious. I mean, it's a very sort of innovative culture. It has to be. And that means quite a lot of ambiguity as well. Because we're still figuring it all out, and we need people that sort of really kind of embrace that. In terms of sort of technical backgrounds, we're less stringent on that, really. We think so. If you think of the challenges I just called out a moment ago, consensus. Say the hard part is the consensus part. The implementation is also challenging, but it's the consensus part that's the real hard part. So if you're coming from a Go background or a Rust background or a Python background, like we don't mind so much about that. We obviously want a good mix of skills on the team. Like if you're working on a Python project, you need a few real Python experts on the team, but it's not the sort of essential piece.
Gotcha.
The other thing I would say is what we have found. At any given moment, we'll have a bunch of roles open and we're hiring, but a lot of the time people come to us who have really thought deeply about our problem space. They're not actually a good fit for any of the roles that we have open, but what they have to say is very interesting to us. And we talk with them and we think, we'd love to get you in the organization somehow. And we do a lot of our hiring that way as well, where people just reach out to us and come up with an idea.
That's smart.
And it's actually a very, very gratifying way to do things. And we've created a whole bunch of roles, just based off the back of that.
I'm a dummy. This is not to sideskip what you've just said, by the way, but I'm a dummy. I haven't talked about your Gitter integration.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is huge news.
This is huge news. This is TechCrunch featured. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Can you talk to us about that? Can you talk to us about what that means for yourselves as well? And listen, we understand the passion for being open source. It's community driven. I love that. Talk to us a little bit about what that Gitter integration means for you guys.
Yeah, it's kind of multifaceted because we've always loved the Gitter project. They were actually opposite the Matrix stand when we did our first sort of splash, right? 2014, they were like the other side, just right opposite us. And in fact, I think Amandine, our co-founder, still has a T-shirt that she picked up from there, which she's been wearing proudly around the office recently. So we've always loved the Gitter project, so Gitter was acquired by GitLab, who open sourced it. And for those that don't know, it's basically a chat application that's really well set up to support developer communities. So it's sort of there's part of us that just really appreciates the fact that Gitter is there and it exists. From GitLab's point of view, like it's I think chat is kind of very important for what they're trying to do, but it's not kind of core. Well, they don't want it to be their core problem to solve. It's a hard problem to solve, and goodness, don't we know it. but they wanted to find a good home for Gitter, and
Yeah.
they're the sort of organization that would want to spend time finding a place where it would be well looked after. And when we heard that they were on the hunt for this home for Gitter, we were tremendously excited about it and wanted to get involved. So there's that side of this, but the other side of it is, because the way that Matrix operates, because we're about interoperability,
Yeah.
what we're gonna do, and we're gonna do all of this very much out into the open. So we've done a bunch of our design sessions on with videos that we've published, and we've blogged about exactly what we're going to do, and we will keep doing that. We're going to first work on the bridge. Actually,
Okay.
Gitter was our second ever bridge,
Okay.
but the implementation was, I'll say it was okay. We're going to do a really, really, really great bridge across. At the same time, we're going to take a look at a couple of the features that the Gitter client has that Element does not.
Okay.
Threading is probably the most obvious example.
Yeah.
Implement those into Element. So then you have a situation where Gitter users can continue to use Gitter just as they do today, but they'll start talking to Matrix users as well seamlessly over that bridge. Over time, hopefully the Element client will also produce a really good experience for Gitter users, and so maybe people will start using Element to reach their Gitter communities. And we're just going to gradually try and make this as good as experience as possible, and demonstrate to the rest of the world this is how you can integrate another chat protocol into the Matrix ecosystem.
Nice.
So it's really exciting. And then on the other side of it, just from people that are interested to see the warts and all side of this kind of project, we're going to do it all in the open. We're going to blog every step of the way. So if you ever wondered how that actually works, then you can just go ahead and do it. I'll just share as an aside, we as Matrix, we put out a weekly video of cool stuff that's been going on. We'll interview someone in the community, or we'll talk about a project that we're working on. And we were going to do this with Gitter, and it had been a really, really, really busy week. And while the slot was there booked, the team hadn't even had a chance to catch up properly with what they were going to do architecturally next steps. And so instead of having the sort of intro to Eric, who's who's joined us as part of this shift, I think initially we were just going to have him, come and just talk a little bit about Gitter. We actually just had the first architectural design meeting and recorded it, and
on video.
That was our weekly thing. So if you want to know what our architectural design meetings look like at Element, then take a look at the matrix.org YouTube channel. It's there. I think we have it on PeerTube as well.
We'll have that in the links below. Everyone, we'll stick that in.
That would be fantastic. It's poor old Eric. It was a great sport, but he found out on the call that that's basically what we were going to do.
Bless Eric. Go with the flow. I like that.
Yeah.
As I am a numpty, and I obviously did miss that really, really key piece. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would quite like to share with us and the audience about Element and Matrix that we haven't touched on?
I mean, I think we've kind of covered the base of it. I mean, I think what I'd really like, just for us as an industry to think a little bit more about, is user data. Who should really control that data? How do we empower our users to have control over their own data? I'd really like that to be a topic of conversation that we all think about more as technologists. So, as people sort of navigate the Matrix ecosystem, we would like them to have a lot more control over that experience, rather than it be us saying, this is what it's going to be like. That's what it's going to be like. So I think just thinking about an individual's relationship with their data, I'd love that to be something that was everyone was just talking about the whole time. I'd love people to be talking more about interoperability a lot more.
Yeah.
And go back to this thing right at the beginning of, oh, I'm on WhatsApp, but maybe now they're advertising to me. What do I do about that? If you have interoperability, then I have a choice. As a user, I can vote with my feet in a way that I probably can't today. And so these are the sort of industry trends I'd love to see elevated, not just in the sort of instant messaging world, but kind of everywhere. But that's definitely something that we're doing at Element and at Matrix. And if these topics are interesting to you and you're passionate about them, get in touch with me and we can talk about it, because I'd love to hear from you.
Social dilemma is a big one.
Right.
Recently, and I couldn't agree more with your statement. Just being able to have choices with some of our data, our messaging platforms. I think choices is the big thing, and you're spot on. I think if they're conversations that we can try and drive, I'd love that. I would love to be involved somehow. If there's anyone that can direct me to places that can have conversations around that, I would. I'll get involved. I'll add my 2 cents. But I think the privacy around it is key, and social dilemma it has opened my eyes up massively to what's going on, I think.
Actually, Amandine, our co-founder, she participated in a panel, basically talking about social dilemma.
Okay.
And it was the panelists on that group are, in my opinion, just really know their stuff on this subject. Amandine as well. And anyone that's kind of interested in that more from the sort of technical side of this, that is the group of people I'd love to elevate.
Okay, great. Are there links to that?
Yeah, I will. I can share that with you.
We'll put those in the below as well. All right, Neil, you've been an absolute pleasure. It's been
wonderful
pleasure.
To be here.
Thank you. To all the Rustaceans, to all of your community that help and support you, come and listen. Thanks for listening. As you can see, the guys at Element massively appreciate you. To our little community as well that's growing, we, of course, really appreciate you. This is why we do it. So like, share, follow us, tell your friends, tell your family, but come and share your stories. I think most importantly, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to share with one another. Neil, it's been an absolute pleasure, like I said. Thank you. And for everyone else that's listened, all the relevant links that we've discussed will be below. Thanks a lot.
Cheers then. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no_. We've also got a website, which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.